years ago, they knew they were losing momentum and failing because of their power grab. Lord Monckton, what do you make of this? This is a huge discovery that the little poster girl that they're defending, it turns out, is an open authoritarian.
That's no surprise, because so many, particularly in sociology, which is a non-subject, which I would personally ban from all universities, if I were an authoritarian, that is, these people think that they know better than we do. This is the essence of totalitarianism. They say they are so much sure that they know better than us, that they want to tell us every little detail of our lives. No, you can't burn coal in the grate or in a power station. No, you can't light a candle, it gives off carbon dioxide. No, you can't even go back to being a caveman, because that means lighting a fire in your cave, and that emits carbon dioxide. What you've got to do is just die and stop breathing, because breathing emits carbon dioxide as well. It's this childish, persistent, stupid, intellectually vapid arrogance which is the hallmark of the totalitarian everywhere. And if you call them totalitarians or fascists or communists or international socialists or whatever phrase also means totalitarianism, oh, how they blub. I once let slip in Australia that a remark by somebody over there was a fascist opinion. I didn't even call the guy a fascist, I just said he'd expressed a fascist opinion. And oh my goodness, how the left wailed and howled when I arrived in Australia for a speaking tour last year. The West Australian in Perth, where I landed, on the front page said, "Ban the Lord." That's their instinctive reaction. Every time you use their kind of language back, they want to ban us from saying it, but they want to continue to have the freedom to use this language themselves. So there's a poisonous double standard there. And this Professor Norgard, the fact is that if she had wanted to deal with what happened in a professional way, let us suppose that her original paper, as she now claims, didn't contain anything about the treatment of individuals who had this mental disease of not believing that global warming is a global crisis. Let's suppose that she was true in that. I'm not going to argue that for the moment at this point. The fact is that her university, in a press release which I read while it was still up on the web, said that she, in her paper, it was their press release describing what she had done, they had cleared it with her before it was put up there, said very clearly that this must be recognised and treated in individuals as well as in societies as a whole. That's what it said. And then when I spotted that, I wrote to her a very polite letter, and I said, look, Professor, I don't know whether you said this or not, but the university is saying that you did, or at least it is accused of saying that you did, because I hadn't yet seen the university press release then. I looked at it again afterwards. I said, if that is what they're saying, could you please get it changed? Because this does give a very bad impression, and it's taking us back to the era of Hitler and Stalin. It was a very polite letter, and I added for good measure a few points about why global warming really wasn't a global crisis after all. And the thing is, I got no reply. What she should have done is to write back and say, thank you for writing in such a civilized fashion to point out what appeared on the press release. I hadn't noticed this. I've asked the university to change it, and they're going to put up a new version. And that would have quietened the whole matter down in a perfectly straightforward way. But no, the left can never admit they ever got anything wrong. So she didn't do that. Instead, furtively, the university, without, it hoped, leaving any trace, took out the words "and treated" in the press release that was out, the University of Oregon, and that those words no longer appear.
But Lord Monckton, let me stop you. Let me stop you here, because this is...
First, I must finish this, because there is a Google cache of the earlier version of the page, and that proves that the words were there. The university didn't realize that in doing this furtively, it was going to make itself look just like another third world dictatorship. And what these people have got to learn is they've got to learn that, in fact, in civilized open debate, there has to be a kind of modicum of honesty, which these people have long since abandoned. And that's why nobody listens to them anymore.
Well, that was my point, though, is that you're being very kind here, saying, you know, perhaps, but look, they've expunged all her writings. The one writing we find on a university, written by her, a letter to the president, officially her site, says we need to get rid of people's rights on this and do whatever we want. And we know this drug, treat, re-educate is constantly parroted by the entire gaggle. So she spews a talking point that we've seen ad nauseum by other control freaks, other greeny, authoritarians. And then we find another thing they haven't memory hold yet, and it says the same stuff. So I mean, obviously she said it.
I think the point is that the way I like to approach these people is to be very polite to them privately and say, look, something's gone wrong here, maybe you'd like to put it right. Then if they're sensible, they write back and they say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, of course I didn't mean that, and change it. But she didn't write back to me. And that tells me all I need to know about what her true intentions were. Because I didn't write a nasty email. It was entirely friendly, civilized, sensible. I'll send you a copy of it after this, Alex, and you can put it up on your website. Because it makes very sensible points, not only about her, but also the main points about why we don't have a problem with the climate. And even if we did, there's nothing we can afford to do about it. It's much better not to worry about it, just let it happen. It won't be that damaging with sea level rising at 1.3 inches per century, etc. So I think what we have to do is to say very firmly to these people, we are now on your case. If you come out and demand international climate courts or European criminal climate courts, they're actually talking about that in Europe at the moment. Of course, I'm trying to stop that too. If you go on talking about having people sent to psychiatric institutions and treated for mental illness, if they dare to raise perfectly legitimate scientific and economic questions rooted in the science, then it is you who deserve to be locked up and not them. And I'm going to make a proposal here, Alex. I think we're going to need a law which says that anybody who uses that kind of hate speech about having people treated for mental illness, if they dare to disagree with the official so-called consensus, which of course is just the Communist Party line, then I think anyone who says that should themselves be locked up in prison for hate speech, for discrimination against those who wish to exercise the right of free speech.
Yes, sir. Well, Lord Monckton, because that's not a violation of their speech, because they're calling for sedition against our liberties and our freedom, a revolutionary overthrow of the Magna Carta, of all common sense, of everything that has been the hallmark of free societies. When they're saying arrest people for their speech, that is the authoritarianism. They're saying shut us up for our scientific discussion, and we see this in every authoritarian system. Absolutely. I mean, what they're calling for is a criminal takeover, is an end of, quote, democracy, in her words. I mean, that is a declaration of war against all free society.
Let me tell you the story of Trofim Denisovich Lysenko. Now, he, in the 1940s and 50s, he was a peasant. He was somebody who thought he knew about how to improve the yield of crops. And his idea was you soak the seed corn in water over the winter instead of planting it out in the autumn to get used to the cold weather, and then it germinates better in the spring. It doesn't, actually. But that was his theory, and he told his local Communist Party secretary of this over a beer one night, and the Communist Party secretary said, Trofim, here you are, an ignorant, untutored peasant, but you have come up with an idea as brilliant as this just because you live in the glorious Soviet Union. And by this propaganda, he ended up, by some ghastly mischance, as head of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, as a result of which there were 20 failed harvests, because they all had to pursue this ludicrous policy of soaking the seed corn in water, where in fact it just becomes rotten and doesn't produce any crop. And 20 failed harvests, 20 million Soviet citizens killed of starvation as a direct result of this mad policy imposed from the center. And anybody who quarreled with Lysenko and said this was wrong, anybody who also opposed his notion there was no such thing as genetics, was sent to prison or killed or both. That was what actually happened in Soviet Russia. And now the same kind of people are using the same kind of language and advocating the same kind of remedies, and it is they, not we, who should go to jail.
Well, I hear you, because, again, people say, well, you're just doing what they're doing. No, they're striking first. We're not saying arrest people for their political speech. We're saying arrest people who say arrest us, because it's that they are calling for the force of the state to be used on our liberties. They are the tyrants. And you know what they say in Latin about tyrants?
Well, absolutely. And as the dictator of Nicaragua used to say to those whom he defeated in the various elections there, you won the election, but I won the count. They like to stack the way things fall in their favor because they know that they can't beat us in argument. If you read Obama's hero, Saul Alinsky, another communist agitator just like Obama himself, Alinsky, in his Rules for Radicals, he says this. He says, don't try to argue with the capitalists. They are right. We all know they're right. We know they have the truth. We know they can argue better than we can because they're right and true. So if you want to deal with them, attack their reputations. And this is what she's doing. She's trying to make out that anyone who dares to say that there may be something wrong with this bogus climate science, that it's been oversold and over-exaggerated, and if there's no economic basis for it anyway, anyone who says that, she says, is effectively mentally defective.
Now, Lord Monkton, we've only got a few minutes left. You've been very gracious to join us on short notice, but I want to release the hounds of liberty here, cry havoc and release them. She had literally hundreds of pages at 3 different universities that were expunged, but they will be in the Google cache and the Wayback Machine. I have a limited crew. You have a limited crew. It is now time for all of us to crawl through the caches of what she said, because they expunged it all in a desperate stratagem to hide this, because the one document we found that they forgot to get, she's calling for authoritarianism. Okay, of course, she'll say this isn't her either in this letter to Obama. So, again, I believe they're afraid of this issue. They know that it's hit the zeitgeist, whereas thousands of other academics saying similar things, literally dozens at UT, I know personally, 2 miles away, calling for it, calling for Chinese-style authoritarianism, forced abortion. I mean, this is what's pushed by these eugenicists. Lord Monkton, I wanted to look at the big picture here and talk about Agenda 21. The environmentalists, who aren't real environmentalists, as you said, they're distracting from all the real stuff that's happening that needs to be dealt with. They are establishing Agenda 21, a global UNESCO model of the ultra-elite against the rest of the free market, a neo-feudalism, a post-industrial world. They've taken over 30,000 acres, that's conservative, in Austin in the last 20 years, forcing people to sell it for pennies on the dollar, farms and ranches in key development zones. I've interviewed the farmers and ranchers. They take this, one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S., they take this land, and a few years later take the restrictions off, and they, the commissars, the former mayors and others, sell it and control it and make money off of it. Open criminal activity. And they told the citizens, when we take this land, it's going to be giant green belts. But most of the land they didn't turn into green belts. They built shopping malls on it, movie theaters, whatever. The point is they stole it. Now, here's the Austin American Statesman. Residents troubled by surveillance cameras. On these tens of thousands of acres they haven't sold yet, because they don't want humans using it because they'll think it's their park, they put up big fences. Show folks a shot of this crew. They put up big game fences where the backyards back up and arrest people with hidden cameras that are seen ever walking on the land that was promised to be greenbelt. And it says in the article, worst of all, they even hike on the trail. The evil humans are hiking on the trail, and they have hidden cameras watching the evil citizens. I mean, this is pure feudalism, Lord Monkton. Your comments on that?
Well, that's exactly what